Hello to folks who are just joining us. We'll be getting started here in just a couple minutes, right at noon Central. As you're joining, go ahead and drop us in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And in just a moment, I'm going to start a little poll so that we can see where people get their drinking water from. Hi, Brittany, all the way from Barbados. That might be the furthest attendee today, but we'll see. Hi, Carrie. Hi, Dale. Folks who are just joining us, go ahead and drop where you're tuning in from in the chat if you want to, and we can see where folks are coming from. And I'm going to go ahead and launch a little poll. I'll leave it up for a couple minutes for the folks who are going to be joining us right at noon. But this poll is hopefully showing up on your screen. And it's about where our drinking water comes from, whether it's a public water system or a private well or somewhere else, or maybe you don't know, and that's okay too. We'll talk about all of the above. But even if we, get our water from a public water system, I think it's really interesting to learn about what it takes to get your water from a well, what kind of issues or challenges you face, and vice versa. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Might surprise you. And for anyone who is just joining us, if you haven't already in the chat, let us know where you're tuning in from so we can get a feel for where folks are located. And then you can complete our little poll here to let us know if you get your water from a public or private water system, or maybe somewhere else, or maybe you don't know. I'll give people just a couple more minutes to file in, and then we will get started. Okay, so I'm looking at the time, and I will go ahead and close our poll. So last call for any responses, and then we will go ahead and kick things off. I see someone asked about how many people are in this webinar. We have just approaching about 30 attendees right now, but I know more people will join us as we get started. We have a lot of registrants. Okay, closing the poll. I'm seeing about 2/3 of us get our water, or more than that, more like 3/4 of us get our water from a public water system, and the remainder from a private groundwater well. I think that's pretty reflective of the general population, but Jesse and Jeff, you guys can correct me if that isn't correct. Anyway, we are about to kick off our next and our latest webinar in the Clean Water webinar series. And today we'll be talking all about drinking water, both public and private. So we can learn a lot about where our water comes from and where everyone else's does too. Specifically, when talking about nitrate, the presence of nitrate and how it is removed and sort of the challenges therein. This ties in very well with our Nitrate Watch program, which if you're not already aware of, we can drop that link in the chat here and you can check it out. It is a free volunteer monitoring program all about nitrates, where you can request a free kit and then report back and test the nitrate levels in your drinking water and surface water sources that you care about. So with that behind us, just a little bit of housekeeping. We do have a chat, which I think most of you have found, where you can, be chatting in off to the side. But if you have questions, we prefer that you drop those in the Q&A. There should be a little Q&A, a little chat bubble at the bottom of your screen. That just helps us keep track of what questions have been asked and answered. And we will be answering questions at the end. So if you have questions for the first presenter, hang on to those, type them in the Q&A. We will answer them at the end. We are planning for about an hour with this presentation. That being said, if you have to hop off at any point or if you need to step away, we will be sharing a recording. So keep an eye out for that in your inbox in the coming days. I think that's all that I have. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to our first speaker, Jeff Mitchell. He is the lab supervisor for Des Moines Water Works, and he will be sharing a little bit about the presence of nitrate and the removal for a public drinking water system. So I'm going to go into the background and let Jeff take over with his screen share.
All right, hopefully I got the right one here. So yeah, I'll be talking about here at Des Moines Water Works, nitrate sources and treatment for surface water providers. So give you a little background of our utility here and challenges we deal with. Here at Des Moines Water Works, we're the largest utility in the state. We got about 600,000 customers, which is about a fifth of the state's population. We have 3 treatment plants. Our Fluor Drive is rated for 75 million gallons a day. McMullen is 25 million gallons a day, and our Saylorville plant is about 10 million gallons a day. We're a surface water provider. There's about 1,848 public water systems here in the state of Iowa. Only about 8% of them are surface water, but they actually serve 46% of the population. So while there's fewer of us, they usually serve the larger populations. Our plants usually have 3 sources of water. We have the Raccoon River, Des Moines River, and what we call the infiltration gallery. The area we serve here, for you not familiar with Des Moines, we're centrally located. There's about a 5-county area of our service area. I'm just kind of zooming 4 counties mainly is what we cover. Then we hit a couple on the outer edges, but we do serve urban, suburban, and rural customers. We have 6 of the fastest growing cities in Iowa as part of our system. Like I mentioned, about 600,000 customers. There's an overview of our Fluor Drive plant, which is mainly what we'll discuss today. The infiltration gallery is this blue line down through here. It's 4 to 5 foot diameter cement rings, 2 foot wide, buried about 20 feet along the alluvial there. We built some ponds over top of them just to help with hydraulic pressure, putting water in there. And this was constructed early 1900s, 1900 to 1930s is when they actually installed this. This is our preferred favorite source of water that we have here. Today we're getting 17 million gallons out of that, and we're producing about 45 to 50 typically. We've got some rain here today, which really hampers our production. So we're down to about 25 maybe today here at Fluor. So most of the water right now is coming from this gallery system. And there's just kind of some pictures of what it looks like when they put it back in there in the 20s and 30s there. So then for our river sources, we've got the Raccoon River here in the yellow, and then the Des Moines that are going up next to it here. So up through central, up into Minnesota, just a little bit for the Des Moines River. The watersheds are here, so you can kind of see the area that it covers for our watersheds. So land covering the Raccoon watershed is pretty similar to Des Moines watershed also. They're about 75% in row crop. And then of that, about 70% of them are non-operator landowner, meaning that most of the land is rented out there. So gets hard for us or people to want to put structures or best management practices. It's going to cost them money if they don't own the land. So that's one of the challenges we deal with up there. Some geological features. So that Des Moines lobe was the last glacier that came through Iowa about 12,000 years ago. It left the land really flat, a lot of potholes in it, wet areas, a lot of ponding and stuff. So what we had to do to make it livable, to make it farmable, is put some drainage in. And so what we wanted to do is lower that water table to give crops room to grow. The ground's not so saturated. The pros of this would be increased yield. There's decreased surface runoff. You get some increased soil aeration, and it provides a timely field operation. It dries that field down quicker so you can get in there and work on it more quicker, sooner. The cons would be excess nutrient transport. So lowering that table down, you have all these nutrients sitting in that soil layer. So when your water comes down through it, it'll pick up those nutrients and it transports them right out through the tile. There's less groundwater recharge. It accelerates the loss of soil organic matter, and it just creates a short circuit for the water. So instead of it pooling on the surface in some of these lakes and ponds, it's just going to go straight down to the tile and out. The 1910s are actually the golden age of the ag drainage. And by 1912, we'd actually spent more money on drainage than the U.S. government spent to build the Panama Canal. Kind of, for those unfamiliar, how they work is you've got tiles coming across the fields at certain intervals, and then they meet up with a header one here they all dump into, and then it'll usually discharge out into an open ditch, a river, a creek. And they're designed to lower the water table 1 foot from the soil surface in less than 24 hours. So it's a real quick removal of this water, which then increases flooding chances also. About 85 to 90% of our native wetlands actually have been drained are now in row crops, which is about 9 million acres. You can just kind of see how they all discharge into this little creek, ditch here, then it'll go out to the stream or rivers. About 61% of these drainage districts that they've created are located in Des Moines lobe. So majority of them are in our watershed. Remember the map before, you can kind of tell it's this same area right here. Then on top of the drainage systems we have, also there's a lot of animal feeding operations. And these purple ones are going to be your confinements. So you're going to have to collect the waste, maintain the waste, and then at some point when there's not crops on the field, you can field apply it. So like I mentioned, there's about 3 million people here in Iowa. We got about 4 million cows, over 30 million pigs, over 60 million chickens, and 12 million turkeys. So a lot of waste to deal with, which is going to be high in those nutrients. And then, like I said, at some point you got to take care of the nutrients, supply them somewhere, put them somewhere. If you are just pasture, a lot of the livestock will be in the creeks, around the creeks. A lot of stuff will wash in there. So our drinking water. So you can see we're a lot of months here in the spring, first part of summer are well over that 10 as a monthly average. If we kind of just take those down and smush them down into one average line, there's what it's going to look like. So typically April, May, June is when we start seeing these nitrate increase. By July, you start getting the crops starting to grow, take up some of the nutrients. You get less rain during the summer there typically. So nitrates really drop off into the fall, get in the harvest, you get some new application going on. You got less ground cover on the ground to absorb the nutrients. So then we start seeing them climb back up here in the fall and the winter. So when we do get nitrate above approaching that 10 milligrams a liter, we do have a removal facility here at Fluor Drive. We use ion exchange. We have 8 of these tanks. They're about 12 foot wide, 14 foot tall, and they'll flow about 1.4 million gallons a day through there. So when we remove nitrate, we're just removing it down to be below the standard regulation level of 10. So we're going to go down to about 8 or so. We don't run this every day. It's only when we need to use it. Like I said, we've got 3 sources of water we can use, so we can blend between the 3. We can use 1 or 2. So we usually try to blend our way out before we have to use the facility here. But when we do, we have it available. It's an anion strange, like I mentioned, it works a lot like a water softener. We're going to have these resin in here. We're going to have chloride on them. And then as we start flowing water through, it's going to have nitrate. The nitrate's going to bump the chlorides off. The resin prefers the nitrate, so it'll release the chloride. It'll fill up with the nitrate. And then after about 24 hours, we have to go in and regenerate them. So we'll take a high brine solution, flush the nitrate off, and repopulate with the chloride. That takes about 50,000 gallons of water to do this regeneration. And just for one vessel, if the Des Moines River, first, just as an example, is at 15 milligrams a liter for nitrate. Once we regenerate this vessel, we take about 3,000 pounds of chloride that would come out. We get just 170 or so pounds of nitrate and 700 pounds of sulfate. And that's what is in our regeneration waste. Typically in the past, we had discharged that back to the river, but now we are sending it to the wastewater facility. So we're not putting the nitrate back in. It's different stream, but even at that point, it was 1 to 2% of the total nitrogen that would flow past us in a day. So it wasn't a major contribution when it went back in. 2015 has been our biggest year to run the facility. We removed about 100,000 pounds of nitrate and had about 36 million gallons of regen we had that year. What's it cost to operate the facility? Started out about $1,000 per vessel per day. 10 years ago, we're up to $1,200, $1,300 a day. That's chemicals for the regens, energy, and just labor to monitor them and regen them. That doesn't include any sort of maintenance we have to do. So like I said, 2015 was our big year, and it was about $750,000 just to run it that year. Number of days that the river's been above this 10 milligram liter for nitrate. You can see where the raccoon is in that lighter blue, the Des Moines in the purplish there. You know, it's pretty typical. We'll see them 50 to 100 days a year where they're going to be over. It's real dependent on weather for nitrate. Like right now, we're getting the drought. So 21, 22, even this year, we don't have very many days above. You look at 18, 19 or 2008, 2009 is really wet those years. So that really dilutes it when it comes out. So it really just depends kind of on the weather, the rain, when we get it, how we get it, if we're going to have high levels. But typically after a drought, it's going to finally build up and then wash out like it did here in 13, 14, and 15. So 2015, the Raccoon River was over the standard for 270 some days, which about 3/4 of the year it was over that level. Des Moines was approaching 200 days. So we had a rough year that year. About 155 days we ran our nitrate removal facility. Just historically, here's kind of how we run it. Like I said, it really depends on weather, on how it is. We treat concentrations. There's also loads, which is when it gets diluted and it's kind of mass going by. But typically it's going to be 20 to 40 or so days a month, maybe 2 months, month and a half that will run it through the season. Like I said, it just really depends on many different factors on how we see it when we see it. Here's just since 1974, the average monthly nitrate concentration. So those high ones are typically going to be in the spring, summertime there. They'll drop back down, and then periods of rain and drought, and then periods of normal rain. So it'll just fluctuate back and forth, but it's on average, it's been going up since 1974. And like I said, we treat the concentration, so we're treating the maximum day, not necessarily the average day also, but along with concentration, you get a load. So this is the amount of nitrate in the water. So like mass of it. So if you have more water, it's going to be lower concentration for the same amount. You can see where it doesn't vary quite as much, but we're getting 60 million pounds, quite a few days here coming through for a year down the Raccoon River. So it's quite a mass of it. Here's a Des Moines overlaid in the orange. So Des Moines actually has a higher load, but it's got higher flow, so it's actually a lower concentration. The max we've seen in the Raccoon River has been 24.8 milligrams a liter. So compared to that 10 standard, Des Moines has been about 18 and a half. 2018, which is a pretty normal average year for us. There's about 53 million pounds that actually flowed past us in the Raccoon River. If you'd applied that as anhydrous ammonia, it'd cost about $10 million to apply it. It'd treat about 400,000 acres. And since 1974, we've been just shy of 2 billion pounds that have gone by us in the river. Again, 2015, which was that high year we had, was 116 million pounds that were removed. And that would cost about $35 million if you applied it, and it'd treat about 800,000 acres. So besides our ion exchange, we do have some other tools we can use for nitrate reduction, not necessarily removal, but at our McMullen plant, we do have wells out there. They're influenced by the river, but they don't run as high typically. So we can switch from wells, the amount we blend from each one. We do what's called Crystal Lake's an old gravel quarry that will pump Raccoon River water in on one side. It'll take about a week or two to get across, and it'll be diluted, and it'll just nitrate natural reduction, about 50 to 60% reduction through there. So we can get a little bit of water through that. And we also built Maffett Reservoir in 1940 in response to a Raccoon River drought. A drought in the Raccoon River, the Maffett Reservoir can feed into the river, but it also feeds into our plant now that we built in 2000. So, which is the reason why I built it there. And then our Saylorville water treatment plant went online in 2011. There again, that's got wells along the river. They're a little further back, probably. They're on the Des Moines River. We have not seen those over 10 yet, but they get close. But the big deal with Saylorville plant is we have reverse osmosis up there. We run about 60% of our flow through the ROs. So we can remove more than half of the nitrate that would be in there. Here at Fluor Drive, like I said, our gallery system runs along the river. It is lower than the Raccoon. And then the ponds that we have above the gallery system, we actually pump water into those to provide that head down there. Well, then we put a recovery valve on the end of them so we can flow water through them, kind of like Crystal Lake, where we can pump it in, recover it a few weeks later, and it'll be about 50–60% reduced. And then another tools that we've had recently here are what we call ASR's Aquifer Storage and Recovery. We have 3 of them, and then there's 3 others in the metro area. And what that essentially is during low demand winter time, we'll pump water down in the aquifer. It'll create this bubble where it'll be stored, and then in the summer we can pull that back out, either for high demand to take the peak off, or if there's poor water quality, we can utilize this water to reduce the amount of the river water we would need. And with our watersheds such as they are, this is kind of a graph what we call seasons of the river. So this is a 12-month span. The orange and the blue lines to start out would be February, March. That's kind of where the snow melt comes. That's where we're going to get our total organic carbon and ammonia spikes coming from there. The ammonia is an issue for us because it takes about 7 parts of chlorine to neutralize that 1 part of ammonia. And then the total organic carbon will react with this chlorine to create disinfection byproducts. So by having to feed a whole lot more chlorine and react with these higher organics, it causes a challenge for us there to remain in compliance. And then the gray there in the middle is the nitrate peak that'll come up in April to July-ish or so. As that starts to go down, and then the yellow one's starting to come up in the fall here, and that's the harmful algal blooms, the cyanobacteria. They will feed off of the nutrients that are there. They like the calm water, warm water. Lakes are really susceptible to this, lakes and ponds, but we do get issues with them in the river too. And that's just where you get that green scum, and that they cause treatment issues just on their own as particles, but then they can also produce toxins. So they not a real known reason when they produce them, why they produce them, or how they can or they can't. So we're out there every day monitoring for the blooms and the toxin production in there. Like I said, they're kind of a late summer, fall. So the top chart just got the cyanobacteria. So the cell counts, we see about 100,000 cells per milliliter of water. And then the toxins, our regulation is set at 0.3 parts per billion. And so multiple times we've seen it 10 times what our regulations at. And for microsystem, we like to just avoid the river if we can. It's typically a Des Moines River issue for us. So we just try not to bring it in the plant. We can get it removed. It just becomes a challenge for us. And if we can avoid it, we can. So that's currently what we try to do. So here in our laboratory, we do about 9,000 tests just for compliance testing. 99% of these are in our lab, so we do most of our own compliance here. We're one of the largest utility labs in the state. And besides compliance, we'll support our process group, about 250 to 300 analyses per day, which comes about 90,000 a year. And also we'll do emerging contaminants just to kind of stay ahead of what's coming. There's cyanobacteria, which is kind of more going towards regulation right now, but the PFAS, that's another big one here currently. That's all your pre-alkyl substances. So the Teflon, Gore-Tex, waterproof, like on fast food wrappers or popcorn bags, firefighting foam. And then the pharmaceutical and personal care products is something else we always just kind of keep an eye on. So these aren't regulated, but we always want to know what's coming through here. We've really invested a lot of money and effort into our lab. That provides us where we can do same day results. We don't have to take these samples, send them out and get results back 2-3 days, a week later. If we want to go out and grab extras more often or somewhere else in the plant, just to make sure how things are going, nothing's getting through, we can do that on our own. It allows us to do investigations, new products, new processes, different dosages. We can do that here. That's just a big cost savings when you do it in-house. So that's kind of a overview of kind of challenges we see. Like I said, nitrate is a big challenge that we have, but there's also many others out there. So that's what I've got on us for today.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And we've had some really great questions coming in. Reminder that we will get to those questions, but we're going to let Jesse speak first and then we'll circle back around. So if you do have any other questions that you're thinking of, make sure to jot them down in the Q&A and we will circle back to those. But with that, I do want to keep us on time. So let's turn it on over to Jesse Campbell. He's the private well coordinator for the Midwest Assistance Program, and he's going to round out our conversation about drinking water with the private well side of things. So take it away, Jesse.
Am I still live? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, Jeff has gave us some great information. I don't deal with systems that are that big, but definitely the surface water issue with nitrates can be big. I want to talk to you guys today about just private wells and what they're dealing with. I might overlap some of the material that Jeff talked about, probably from the sources and such. Just really quick, for you guys who don't know who I am or what organization we are, Midwest Assistance Program is part of the RCAP network, and we cover this 9-state region right here in the middle of the United States. And I, as a private wells coordinator, do actually go to all of the states and meet with well owners and provide our services to the well owners in those areas. So, all right, let's get to our information. 25 minutes is a short amount of time to talk. Nitrates, the presence of nitrates in groundwater and the challenges faced by private well users is really what we're going to look at today. got a couple of quotes here for you guys, just to give you some percentages. I found this in the Iowa Environmental Council's Water Land News. More than 6,000 of the wells that they tested, or 12%, had nitrate averages at or above the EPA's legal limit for drinking water systems, and that would be the 10 parts per million or milligrams per liter, however you want to put it. And then more than 12,300 of the wells were actually above the 5 parts per million. And that's a lot. So when you're thinking about 12,300 Iowa wells, there are a lot of wells in Iowa, but for 22% of them to be over the 5 parts per million, that is definitely an issue that well owners are dealing with. This is what we're looking at here in the next few slides. Private drinking water systems are not regulated, and why that becomes an issue with nitrates. The ongoing human activity, that's the main source of nitrates in our groundwater. And then the well owner's responsibilities, and why that definitely becomes a struggle when they're trying to deal with nitrates or any contaminant that they're dealing with in their private drinking water. So lack of regulation, this is one that I hit on all the time when I'm out there meeting with well owners, because this really does come back to a lot of their problems. A lot of well owners want that feeling of independence, that ability to make their own decisions, the government not to talk to them about their water system, and to be able to make those personal choices. But, it ends up becoming that wild, wild west mentality out there. Everybody's doing something different. Everybody is doing their own thing, and there really isn't a lot of guidance for those people that want to do the right thing. So when I go out and I meet with a well owner and they ask me, well, what exactly am I supposed to have? Really, what I can provide them is recommendations based off of public water systems, because there is no private well system regulations. Even the EPA has public water MCLs, maximum contaminant limits, but they haven't created anything for private wells, nor have they actually regulated it down to private wells to say this is exactly what private well systems should have in them. And that leads to that lack of a consistent message. Really, nationally, you can go from county to county and even state to state and find a completely different message being provided to well owners. They might drive over to the next county over and hear that their nitrates over this amount is too much, or they might be in their own county and their county person might tell them, well, 12 parts per million is fine, don't worry about it. So there really is not that consistent message out there because of the lack of regulation. There's no regulation that you can cite to the well owner and say, this is exactly what it says in the regulation. This is exactly what you need to do as a private well owner. All we can do is make recommendations based off of public water. So Heather asked me to go over the presence of nitrates in groundwater. So my next few slides might be a little bit repetitive off of what Jeff was telling us earlier. But when we're talking about private wells, a lot of times we're talking about smaller systems, and they can definitely be affected locally. Whereas your surface water systems have huge drainage basins that are catching a lot of water from a lot of areas. That private well owner also has to deal with what's just going on right there in their backyard around their well sometimes. So as we go through these slides, think about that smaller footprint and what's going on, and not so much on the big picture. I did want to throw in there that nitrates do occur naturally in very low levels. One of the neatest things I like to teach in my classes is that lightning bolts and thunderstorms can create nitrates, which is kind of neat. But when we're looking at the EPA nutrient policy data, they state that concentrations greater than 3 milligrams per liter generally indicate some type of contamination has entered the groundwater, and concentrations greater than 1 milligram per liter indicate human activity. And so when we're thinking about that, those really low levels that occur naturally are typically under 1 milligram per liter concentrations in groundwater if we're indicating human activity with over 1 milligram per liter. Okay. And so my next few slides are just a little bit about human activity in Iowa, and actually in my entire region, and probably nationwide as well. of what's really causing these nitrates to be in our groundwater, what's caused them historically, and why they continue to go up in a lot of areas. I know Jeff was talking earlier about the irrigation and the dewatering of the farm fields. The nitrogen fertilizer being put on the farm fields definitely doesn't get captured, not in its entirety, goes and runs off of the site through the tiling that we were looking at in his slides. And then historically, there were these agricultural drainage wells that were put in. It was decided, and historically, we can always look back on history and say, why did they do that? But somewhere along historically, somebody said, hey, why don't we try to put this water back down in the aquifer, and that'd be a great place for it. But all they were doing was funneling those heavy amounts of nitrogen, fertilizer, and chemical runoff from the fields right down into the aquifers. And so these drainage wells are being done away with. The data here says, and this is 2003 data, they said that 400 agriculture drainage wells are being closed and sealed with documents that improve the water quality. And I definitely say that it would improve the water quality, because you're taking that runoff, and that runoff from farm and agriculture is very heavy in the substance. So if dilution's the solution to pollution, then we've taken that really heavily concentrated and shoved it down in the aquifer and made just a contamination plume with those agricultural drainage wells historically. It is a good thing that they're starting to get rid of them. But as you were hearing about earlier, getting rid of the agricultural drainage wells puts it in our surface water sources. So our Des Moines rivers and Raccoons rivers and all of our rivers and lakes now have that higher concentration ending up in them. Another thing to think about in Iowa is over on the northeastern side of Iowa, they have what's called karst geological formations. Iowa has we've seen the map of Iowa's geology earlier in the presentations, but it's a vast change in geology from the southwest corner being glacial till, which is just basically the leftovers from the glaciers, to northeast Iowa, where they have the karst geological formations. Those karst geological formations mean that there's bedrock close to the surface. There's a lot of sinkholes, caves, limestone entrances, things like that. Those are direct pathways a lot of times for surface contaminants that just get funneled directly into our groundwater. And so any activities that are going on around those sinkholes historically and even today, or around those cave areas or karst geological areas, it can very quickly move through bedrock. Bedrock aquifers have some of the fastest movement for contaminants because they work like a pipe. There's not sand and gravel or dirt in between the rocks. If a rock has a crack in it, and it's a 1-inch crack, it's about the same as a 1-inch pipe. So if contaminants are flowing through that, there's really nothing slowing it down, and it can go down fast, and it can move across the entire region really fast. So that is definitely a geological contributor, and the human activity above those zones contributes to the nitrates in the groundwater. He went over animal feedlots earlier, but animal feedlots definitely become a concentrated source of nitrates going into our groundwater, along with bacteria and viruses. Those feedlot ponds, those runoff ponds that they have for the feedlots, they're supposed to be properly designed. I know that confined animal feedlots are supposed to be regulated by DNR properly. So a proper confined animal feedlot shouldn't be causing major issues as long as their ponds are being taken care of properly. But the historical ones and the just pop-up ones that are on individual farms, they're not large scale operations. They are definitely contributing to that nitrate contamination going down into the aquifers and being sucked up into our private wells. Another human activity that is more common nowadays, because everybody's trying to figure out on a public basis how to get rid of their sludge from their public lagoons, how to get rid of their wastewater even from their public wastewater treatment facilities, is that injection or surface application of those wastewater sludges and wastewater contaminants on the land surface. If it is not properly regulated and it's not properly completed, then it definitely is going to increase that contaminants, the nitrates for our well owners in the area, as well as just increasing the nitrates and contaminants in the aquifers overall. Septic systems are really our big one with private wells that we are constantly talking to people about, because most well sites have an on-site wastewater system. And I use on-site wastewater system because there are several different versions of a private on-site wastewater system. It may not be the conventional tank with drain field. It may be something like a tank and mound, or it might be a designed wetland, or some variation in between. But when those septic systems or those on-site wastewater systems begin failing, because they do fail, they're not file and forget systems. They weren't meant to be buried in the 1970s and never even looked at for the last however many years. So when they do begin to start failing, they do start to spike the nitrates locally right there on that property. And a lot of times when a well owner does their annual testing, if they're testing annually properly and they're testing for nitrates and bacteria, the bacteria may not spike because the contamination plume from their septic might be far enough away that the soils are taking care of that bacteria and eliminating it. But what they'll see is they'll see the nitrates spike in their well. And that can identify that they're having a major issue with their on-site wastewater system below grade. And it can definitely end up in their well or their neighbors. And that's what happens a lot of times. The neighbor septic system's right across the fence from your well, and it wasn't designed properly to be the proper distance away. And all of a sudden you're having issues with nitrates and bacteria in your well. Wells themselves, everyone wants to punch a hole in the ground and stick a straw in it and drink the water. But every single time we punch a hole through a confining layer, like a layer of clay or a layer of shale, those are our confining layers, aquatards. Every time we punch a hole through them, it actually creates a hole. And so when abandoned wells are not properly filled and properly done away with, and historically there's a lot of these abandoned wells, especially out in Iowa's farmland, where the farmhouse burned down and the farmer just decided, hey, we're not going to rebuild, we're just going to farm right on over the top of where that old house was. But nobody could remember where the old well was, so it just kind of gets dozed underground, and now there's an abandoned well underneath that farm field that nobody knows about. And so those contaminations from the contaminants like nitrates from the surface will find their way down that open hole right into the deeper groundwater and end up causing issues for wells that are designed properly, or even other shallow wells that are in the area. Another major issue with wells that I find in Iowa are the large diameter bored wells. Large diameter bored wells are typically very shallow in nature. They're usually put into an area where there is not a great aquifer, so there's not a lot of access to good water. So they're looking for volume over quality. And so those large diameter wells historically were limestone lined or brick lined, and that's not a proper casing. So it allows every contaminant from the surface to enter them and get down into the deeper groundwater. And the newer large diameter wells, even as new as 1990s, 1980s, when I go out and I take a look at them for well owners to give them a good assessment of what's going on with their water quality, a lot of times if they're not grouted properly, they're seeing shifting at each seam. And that's allowing infiltration to get into that well system. And once those surface contaminants get down below the root line, like nitrogen and nitrates, they want to be eaten by green leafy plants, and there's no green leafy plants down in our aquifers. So once they get down there, they just become another suspended solid that we've got to continue to deal with. So poor construction wells and abandoned wells, definitely a big issue on those property sites, and even for just local communities that are drinking from wells. I wanted to throw this one in here because we pick on the farmers all the time about nitrogen and nitrates. And of course, they are a very large producer of this issue with nitrates, but our urban runoff definitely provides nitrates and other contaminants as well. So everybody in town that wants to have a green yard that's throwing more nitrogen on their yard than they could ever use, that's running off their property, that's soaking down into the groundwater. along with all the other possible sources of nitrogen and chemicals that are in the city. So really quick, well owners do face many challenges with nitrates, and many challenges, but nitrates is just one of them. And I listed a lot of the challenges that they face here. And I don't like to read my slides to people, so I'm not going to read all of them, but just a couple of them that really stand out is a lack of education, either deliberately or due to availability. And just to talk on that really quick, I say deliberately because we're in a technological age where you can just Google almost any topic and come up with an answer. And I know that the message is not completely consistent across the board, because when you Google nitrates in my well water, you'll come up with 700 different hits, right? So, I mean, and they're not always saying the exact same thing, but the education's there. People can go look. Everything's online nowadays. And so I have to throw in there, it's either deliberate or maybe they don't have access to the internet. I do meet with a lot of low income individuals that don't have access yet in rural America. They don't have any type of Wi-Fi, even their phone doesn't work at their house, that type of thing. So there is that lack of availability to education. And another one I wanted to hit on this screen is an apathy towards water quality issues till there is a major health emergency. I see this all the time. It's an apathy. It really is, because nobody cares until somebody gets sick. And part of that's education. They didn't know that they should be checking for those types of things, but a lot of times they have at least tested once in the lifetime of the well, and they've found a contaminant and they've said, well, I'm just not going to worry about that. Out of sight, out of mind. If nobody's getting sick, I'm not worrying about it. And so that's kind of an apathy with our well owner community that is definitely an issue. So I use this verbiage all the time as well. Well owners are the owner, producer, operator, and consumer of a potentially dangerous product, because they are. When we go to the McDonald's or we go out to a restaurant, they serve us a glass of water with our dinner. We know that that's a public source. We know that they have to give us safe, clean drinking water, because if they don't, there will be legal actions that we can take against them because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Well, when it comes to the private well system, they are the owner, producer, operator, and consumer of that potentially dangerous product. And a lot of them don't even think of it that way. It's a potentially dangerous product. The majority of well owners across the board in my entire 9-state region, I meet with about 100 to 80 to 100 well owners at least a year to provide assessments for them through our program. And the majority of them do not test their water. I have to check the box, never tested, more times than I ever checked the box, tested even once. And some of the issues, I didn't know I should test. That's educational. That's on either deliberate, or it's on us as professionals to reach out there and try to teach them what they should test for. But I do hear all the time, I tested once and it was fine. Especially with something like nitrates or bacteria, water quality can change. They've tested once in 1980 and it was fine, but things have changed. The well is aged. Your neighbors built a new confined animal feedlot on their property, or you used to live alone and now there's 1,000 houses around the outside of you. Things change. So I hear that all the time. I tested once and it was fine, so it should be fine. And then I talked about how they will ignore contaminants, and they have that right to ignore contaminants because nothing is regulated on their end. So if they want to ignore it, I always tell them that's perfectly fine. You can drink dirty water if you want to. You can go out in the backyard and stick a straw in a mud puddle and drink it, and nobody shows up with handcuffs to take you to jail. But you shouldn't be providing that water to your children because they don't really have a choice. And you really should have a sign over your front door that says non-potable water, so that your neighbors, your friends, your family, people who come over to visit, they might be worried about it, even though you choose to ignore it. So what are they supposed to be doing? At a minimum, well owners are encouraged, and I say encouraged because there is no regulation, they're encouraged to test for bacteria and nitrates annually. They're testing for those nitrates annually because it can indicate local water quality changes like a failing on-site wastewater system or human activity changes. Your neighbors all started to put a ton of nitrogen on their yards and everybody put in sprinkler systems, that type of thing. Or there might be damage to the well casing and you might be getting water from a different zone. So we do encourage at a minimum, and that's a bare minimum, for the well owners to test for coliform and nitrates annually. And what did Jeff say earlier? Just because I was listening to Jeff's presentation, he does 9,000 tests, 250 to 300 per day. And we're asking well owners to do a minimum of 1 a year. That's a bare minimum. Well owners are also encouraged to take a more comprehensive, and this is one that really, it almost never gets completed. And I talk to well owners all the time because they'll be like, hey, my neighbor did such and such and it changed my water quality. Well, if you never took a more comprehensive test of your water quality originally, then you really don't have any type of leg to stand on to say that your neighbor changed your water quality. So if, from a legal standpoint, it's important that a well owner would go out and take this more comprehensive test. But also you would think from a public health standpoint, they would want to know what is in their water so that they can have a better idea of what's in their water. The ideal solution or the ideal situation, well, a well system, even a private well system, should be tested multiple times a year for bacteria, because bacteria is the integrity of our system. It's telling us whether or not surface water is getting into our groundwater. We want to know what's going on there. So if a well is designed properly, built properly, and maintained properly, then coliform bacteria should technically never be in it. And so we're taking that bacteria test. And so ideally, we would want them to take a bacteria test throughout the year to make sure that nothing changes in their system. And then if they are treating their water, which I'm going to talk about treatment next, they should be taking a raw water sample and then a treated water sample to know what's in their waters. So we want to know there's 20 parts per million nitrates in my raw water. I put in a treatment system and now I've got 8 parts per million nitrates, and that's fine with me. A lot of people, though, they never take that treated water test to make sure that they are actually treating the water to bring it in. They just trust whatever the guy said that sold them the treatment system. And so ideally, well owners should be testing their water after the treatment, and they should be testing that water throughout the year if they're trying to treat for something that is a potential health concern like nitrates. So when they are treating their water, a lot of well owners lack the knowledge to treat their own water. I'm a licensed water operator, and even sometimes it blows my mind to try to think about treating water, especially on the scale of what a public water system does. But I hear all kinds of things from well owners, and I get all kinds of different attitudes from well owners when they are trying to treat. Maybe they have installed a reverse osmosis system, but they've never tested after it to make sure that it works properly. Some of these aftermarket RO systems that aren't WQA certified, or they haven't taken that step to have NSF rating completed, some of them do not remove the nitrates to the efficiency of what other RO systems would. So I like to use the example, if 10 parts per million is our goal and you have 100 parts per million in your water and your treatment is only 90% effective, then you still have 10 parts per million nitrates in your water after you get done treating it because it's only 90% effective and you're still leaving some in the water. So it's really important that you test afterwards. I get all kinds of neat stuff while I'm out there. It was here when I moved in, so I kept using it. I've got a picture in my next slide. I'm going to skip to my next slide really quick, show you that picture. This looks like a standard water softener. I go into homes all the time and ask them, what are you treating your water? What are you treating your well water with? And they'll say, well, I'm softening it. An anion exchange and an ion exchange water treatment system look exactly the same. Unless a water treatment professional has taken the actual time to stick a label on there to let you know what you're treating with that system, you don't know what you're treating with it. So I do run into well owners out there that they have a system that looks just like a water softener, but the resin is treating uranium, or their water that looks like a water softener, but they're using chlorides and they're treating for nitrates. So just thinking that you just have a water softener can sometimes be a major issue, because well owners move into that property and they just assume it's a water softener. The real estate agent didn't know that it wasn't a water softener. The previous well owners never tested the water or didn't provide any test. So now that person's been living in the property for 5, 10, 20 years, and they just assume that they're softening their water, whereas it might have been a contaminant that they could have tested for before and after the treatment. And if they tested before the treatment and seen that there was a high amount of nitrates, and they tested after the treatment and they saw that there was a low amount of nitrates, they'd be able to at least say, hey, I know that this system is treating for nitrates. It may not be a standard water softening system. A lot of our water treatment professionals, so like our Culligan men and water doctors and those different types of organizations, a lot of them are product driven and profit driven. They're not actually public health driven. So they're not actually out there a lot of the times completely looking out for the public health. They are out there providing a service and providing a paid service and attempting to make enough money that their organization is profitable, correct? So a lot of times you'll see them sell a water softener to an individual, and the individual assumes that their water is now safe because they have a water softener, but a standard water softener does not treat for nitrates. It will, because nitrates are a suspended solid, it will take some of the nitrates out, because your standard water softener resin works like a filter. So some of the suspended solids are going to get caught. But if you're actually targeting nitrates, it needs to be it needs to be anion exchange, and it needs to be the chlorides instead of the sodium. Distillers is another way to treat nitrates, but I very rarely ever see distillers in small homes. It just takes too long for a distiller to work to provide any amount of water. Distillers can take up to 6 hours to provide even 1 gallon of usable water. So I threw it on here because it is a possible treatment in the home for well owners. The most common one that we see is point of use reverse osmosis. Point of use reverse osmosis is typically like this picture down here in the lower right. It's usually right under the kitchen sink. It's got its own little pressure tank. It is actually a system typically. Reverse osmosis systems are a system, so only one of the filters in there will be RO. The other ones will be either a sediment filter or a carbon filter, depending on what you're trying to treat with your RO system. But on only one of the filters would be an actual RO filter. And they will remove nitrates, and they are really efficient at removing nitrates. Again, though, if you get a 90% effective and you have super high nitrates, you're still going to be leaving some behind. So you're going to want to test and see what you're leaving behind. If you go out and you buy a 99% effective RO unit, then you're only going to be leaving a very small amount behind. And I've also seen nitrates and other suspended solids that people were dealing with, like arsenic and things like that, that were in such high amounts that they had to put in 2 in succession. So they had to treat with RO and then treat their RO water with another RO to pull out all of the contaminant that they wanted to pull out. So it's not a catch-all, win-all. There is no 100%, I put this water system in and it treats everything that might possibly get into my house. So it's definitely need to do their homework for well owners when they are dealing with nitrates and any other contaminant that's in their water. So that is what I've got for you guys. I think I stayed within my time frame. So let me stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Jesse. And yes, you did great on time. Thank you both to Jesse and Jeff for giving those great overviews of very important, multifaceted topics. We do have a good amount of questions, and if it's okay with you, Jesse and Jeff, there's a chance that we might go a little bit over our time slotted. Are you okay to stick around for a couple minutes and answer some questions?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Sweet. If anyone listening needs to hop off, remember that the recording is going to be shared, so keep an eye on your inbox in the coming days. But with that, I'm going to do my best to get all of our questions out there. I know we've got some in the chat, some in the Q&A. The first one, it was asked during Jeff's talk, and it was about when we were talking about the water sources for Des Moines Water Works and mentioning how rain can hamper the collection and the treatment process. Can you explain how and why that is the case?
I'm not quite sure. Rain hampering the collection. I mean, unless this is like on the tiles where it'll push it through, or versus having wetlands out there like it used to be before the tiling. So you would get the rain that would be able to pool in these ponds or low spots, and now it's just getting directly discharged to a ditch to the river through these tiles. I think that's where I use that app, maybe.
Think so. Let's take it to the next one. And this is a question I think both of you might be able to answer. It was with the amount of livestock and row crop, specifically in Iowa, but really everywhere across the farm belt, are there any practices that will slow the flow of nutrients? And can we fund these?
Definitely. And they are funded in Iowa, actually. I'll start and then let Jeff finish, but I know that they have a cover crop program in Iowa, and they've been running it for several years. There's some really great information and videos on the Iowa DNR site that you can go and look at on it. I know that I believe one of the colleges is working on it as well, but they sow in cover crops like a rye in the fall, or turnip or something like that. And basically it holds that nutrient near the surface where it's supposed to be, keeps it from running off, provides some ground cover. I know grassed waterways are another great one. Wetlands is also another great one. Jeff, what do you got?
You said cover crops was good, and we actually are partnering with a program right now on those. But yeah, wetlands, stormwater detention areas, they have bioreactors where they can, put like wood chips on the ground, you flow your tile through it, they'll take out the nutrients. And a lot of these there's funding for them out there, partial funding.
Yeah. They're out there. They just need to be installed. And as far as I understand, these solutions are out there and they are making a difference, but it's also a matter of application, and it's a multifaceted solution.
Yeah.
I think that there's some issues with the cover crops, like rye has the same bacteria and something like that as corn. So they're trying to figure out whether it's spreading the bacteria to the corn and that type of thing. So there's definitely some really good research going on in Iowa on cover crops, and cover crops are huge because when they put that nitrogen down in the fall and then snow sets on top of it, and then it all just runs off in the spring. If there's a cover crop there, it'll stay in place. So definitely something to think about.
Awesome. This question I know came in during Jeff's talk. It was when we were talking about the ion exchange system, how the chloride goes in to kick out the nitrogen. Do you reuse that chloride, or do you have to constantly get new chloride to then do that process?
We are getting new each time. I mean, it's bound up in that water with the nitrate and the sulfate and everything else. There are ways you could separate it out. But currently we're just buying new each time.
Yeah. Also on the Des Moines Water Works side, with the microcystin limits and allowable levels, is the allowable level or threshold for microcystin with Des Moines Water Works lower than the state and federal regulatory levels, or the same?
So right now it's a health advisory, and they have a children and an adult level. So the children's 0.3, the adults like 1.6.
Gotcha.
It's on a 10-day, but we just go off the children, because if you put a notice out there that children can't drink it, they won't understand the difference, but adults possibly could, but children can't. So
yeah,
at least internally, or when we're talking, we always just say 0.3 is our level.
better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
You also were talking a little bit about concentration and also load, and sort of treating for nitrate removal based on
water. So we're regulated on concentration, but we also pay attention to load, because that's really the mass that's going by. You can have 5 pounds of nitrate in a gallon, or 5 pounds in 10 gallons. Obviously the 10 gallons would be better for us because it lowers the concentration, but there's still, if you're looking at the nitrate loss or nitrate going by, that's the same amount going by. So that's kind of why we look at both of them. But for regulation wise, we're regular on concentration.
Makes sense. As far as the infrastructure, and Jeff, this is still for you, sorry. You said that the concrete infrastructure for the infiltration gallery was installed in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
When, if ever, will it need to be replaced or updated, and will that be expensive?
Hopefully never, but it's never the case. We are doing some valve structures they've had to re-sleeve and cement wise and rebuild some of the outsides, but we've recently been doing valve operations just to get them going, exercising and getting camera down there to look at it. Most of it seems to be in pretty good shape. If we would have to replace it, I don't know if we ever could afford it nowadays.
I guess we'll
It's about
find
3
out.
miles long. So.
Okay, I know, Jesse, you're kind of aware of some questions happening in the background here. Do you want to take it away with the first one of your choice?
Sure. I just threw my all question live on all of them. So
Yeah.
besides rainwater, what are the sources of recharge for private wells that are large bore dug wells? And that one's a hard one. Let's just use Southwest Iowa, Northwest Missouri. That whole area is glacial till, and glacial till can be a rock the size of your house, or it can be stratified layers of sand and gravel. It can be just clay. Glacial till is just it's a difficult region to get water from. It's not typically considered an actual aquifer. So a lot of times you'll see large diameter dug or bored wells in them. Maybe they found a sand and gravel lens that's in that zone that provides enough water to support that well. But it's a slow recharge. So, and not to get super technical, but when a well recharges slowly, let's say that recharges at 1 gallon per minute. If it recharges at 1 gallon per minute and you have a 5 gallon per minute pump in your well, you're going to drag it dry because it can't keep up with you, right? But if it recharges at 1 gallon per minute and you have a 36-inch around large diameter well, you're going to have a lot more volume of water above your pump. And so technically that well is playing the role of storage facility and recharge at the same time. So those well owners, a lot of times they're getting their water from groundwater. It's coming in, it might be coming in slower, and then it's recharging the well overnight, the 12 to 13 hours people sleep at night. And then the next day it has enough volume in the well for them to be able to use throughout the day before they suck it dry. Now that's typical. If a large diameter well is drawing its water from the surface, which a lot of them do, they were designed to capture all the water that they possibly could, then really they're technically nothing more than a small diameter pond, because wells are wells because we're getting groundwater only. If they are getting surface water in them, it is technically a small diameter pond, and you should be treating it just like a surface water system, which means treating for everything that might wash into it at any time. Where else do they get their water? They should be getting their water from the ground. And I like to tell people, if they don't know, pump your well dry. Throw a commercial size 25 gallon per minute pump in it and pump it dry and see if it refills. If it refills on its own from the ground, then you're getting groundwater. If it doesn't refill on its own from the ground and you have to wait for a rainfall, then you're recharging from the surface, and that's not what you want. It's not really a great source of drinking water. But you volume over quality. It's a constant struggle with well owners in those areas, volume over quality. I'd like to hit that next question.
Yeah, go for it.
That way I don't keep everybody here all day. The Iowa Grants to Counties program. I love to talk about the Iowa Grants to Counties program. Actually, I was talking about it with Heather before we even started the webinar today. Iowa Grants to Counties program is a program that is funded through an agricultural tax in Iowa. And what it does is it provides testing annually for all well owners in the state of Iowa, as long as their county opts into the Grants to Counties program. So their county environmental health professional would have the funding to come out and test their well for bacteria, nitrates, arsenic, manganese annually. They do have that choice, if they don't find that contaminant, not to keep checking for it every year. But they will at least come out and check for all of them annually the first time. And then your bacteria nitrates annually, you could be getting through that Grants to Counties program. That Grants to Counties program also has a bit of money for well rehabilitation. It's a cost share, and plugging abandoned wells as a cost share as well. So the question was, are there any of those programs in my other 8 states? There really aren't. That is a unique program to Iowa. Most of the well owners in my other 8 states, they are either on their own completely, or maybe their local county has a program that they're willing to fund through a grant that the county got. I know Minnesota's got some different funding as well for well testing and well closures and things like that, but it's not quite at that level of the Grants to Counties program that Iowa has. So no, it's the wild, wild west out there, and it's a drought when it comes to funding. So everybody asks me, where do I get the funds to fix this? And 90% of the time it is you go and get a personal loan, because that's really all you can do. And I think I answered Dale's question, get their test. Yeah. So I answered both those questions at the same time.
Excellent. Well, I know it's no substitute for a lab test, but we offer free nitrate test strips via the Nitrate Watch program. Could be a great supplement to something that's already happening.
For my other 8 states, I'll definitely talk about it.
Yes.
You guys can get involved in that.
And I did see there's one other question I'm aware of in the chat that I was kind of saving because I can kind of speak to it a little bit. It was in the past, there's been a rumor that the EPA was considering reducing the nitrate threshold, the allowable standard. Is there any discussion about this? We have been keeping kind of a close eye on this because the current standard of 10 parts per million, there is some evidence that it may or may not be significant or sufficiently protective of human health. And it just so happens that in June of this year, the EPA restarted their IRIS assessment, which is basically a risk assessment where they're supposed to consider all of the current best research and then think about the possibility of revisiting the standard. So it's kind of a multi-step process, but they did just restart this assessment, and there will be a public comment period. So if you are in our sphere of communication, be prepared to provide a public comment, because we are definitely in favor of them revisiting the information just to make sure that it is protective of human health. That's my take. I don't know if you folks have any other information to share. Awesome. Well, with that, I think we've answered all the questions. Abby, please chime in if I'm missing anything important. But I think we will bid everyone adieu and say thank you again to Jesse and Jeff. Everyone, thank you for your fabulous questions, and make sure to watch your inbox for the recording so you can do it all over again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.